We're now going to shift to talking about the occupied West Bank in the context of what's happening in Gaza, of course. As the Israeli military continues its systematic genocide inside Gaza, the Israeli political leadership and its settler foot soldiers are escalating their policies of land theft and destruction of Palestinian homes, while the occupation army intensifies its raids and mass arrest campaigns across the West Bank. This week, Tamara Nassar reported that Israel's so-called security cabinet approved the legalization of 5 settler outposts. Bezalel Smotrich, the ultra-far-right Israeli finance minister, is attempting to streamline the process of legalizing and recognizing outposts under Israeli law by providing them with basic services and creating facts on the ground. She adds that last month, Israel quietly announced one of the largest state land grabs since the signing of the Oslo Accords in the mid-1990s. Meanwhile, as Tamara reports in another post, Israel's military has intensified its raids into occupied West Bank cities, towns, and refugee camps since its genocide in Gaza began last October. These military operations, which often involve special units and an array of armored vehicles and bulldozers, have wrought widespread devastation, severely damaging electricity networks, water and sewage infrastructure, uprooting roads, and destroying homes. More than 550 Palestinians have been killed in the occupied West Bank since October 7th, including at least 536 by Israeli forces, according to the United Nations. Joining us to talk about the situation in the West Bank, including the maneuvers by the Palestinian armed resistance factions who are defending their communities and their land against the Israeli military and violent settlers, is our contributor Abdaljawad Omar, a lecturer at Birzeit University. Abdaljawad, welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thank you for having me, Nora.
Well, it's been a while, but we're so glad to have you back. Let's jump into it. Following Israel's massacre of some 90 Palestinians in al-Mawasi in Gaza on Saturday, the Palestinian Authority Presidency, in other words, the office of Mahmoud Abbas, issued a statement effectively blaming Hamas for Israel's massacres. It said, quote, "The presidency sees that by escaping national unity and providing free pretext to the occupation state, the Hamas movement is a partner in bearing legal, moral, and political responsibility for the continuation of the Israeli war of genocide in Gaza." What has been the reaction to this statement, and what do you think motivated it?
I mean, the reaction has been, to say the least, full with rage among many Palestinians, and also ridicule, directed at the presidency and the spokespersons of Fatah that have been speaking and trying to hold the resistance in Gaza accountable for what's occurring and unfolding in terms of the genocidal war. But at the same time, what's motivating it, which is more dangerous, is this kind of ideological fight that is happening within Palestinian society, and in which the PA has become an integral part and role. It's trying to echo Israeli psychological warfare, talking points, by attempting to kind of de-link the Palestinian society overall from its resistance, and serving this through the severance, serving Israeli war aims, which is to defeat the resistance and render Gaza unlivable, and ensure that Israel comes out on top in this war, and failing, of course, at the same time to actually meet the challenge, the national challenge that has been opened in October 7th, which would have demanded from the PA to actually participate and attempt, at least to the best of its capacity, to not allow Gaza to go through this war alone. So what's motivating this is this alliance between this PA elite and Comprador class that is betraying the nation in the name of the nation, and at the same time, they have this elite has a extreme anxiety over Hamas and Islamic Jihad and all the resistance groups in Gaza coming out with significant strategic results from this war, because that will confine their role, that will enable these forces to claim that they're the nationalist forces that are safeguarding the Palestinian cause, and will render them in the eyes of their own people as irrelevant and ahistoric.
Yeah.
Abdaljawad, since we spoke last time, well, our colleague Tamara Nassar in the piece that Nora just quoted from says that at any other time, what's happening in the West Bank in terms of resistance to the escalating Israeli aggressions would be called a third intifada, but in a sense, it's been overshadowed, continues to be overshadowed by the enormity of the genocide in Gaza. But there is resistance, and it is improving and refining its tactics. It's getting better at using, for example, what are they called? Improvised explosive devices. At the same time, we do see criticism being voiced by people from Gaza or people in solidarity with Gaza saying that there is still a kind of a dormancy in the West Bank, that it's still, in a sense, pacified. It's hard to ask people who are already living under such pressure and such conditions, and Israel has murdered more than 500 Palestinians in the West Bank alone since October 7th, arrested hundreds, thousands. How do we make sense of this? Is it right to demand more of people in the West Bank? Is it the Palestinian Authority that continues to ensure this pacification? Just give us a sense of how we can understand a picture there that would even allow the Palestinian Authority to think that they can blame the resistance for Israel's genocide and get away with it.
I mean, it's a complicated question, Ali, to be honest, and it has a multi-layered answer as well. So you have to bear with me a bit or slightly. First, there is a resistance, and it has been rising in the past couple of years. And this resistance emanates from a concrete situation, specifically in the north. And I would agree in terms of trying to describe that there is an intifada, but I would confine it geographically to the north of the West Bank. So the areas that surround or, go from the Jordan Valley upwards to Tubas, Tulkarem, Nablus, Jenin. These are the areas that have an active militant formations that are engaging in the buildup of IEDs, the capacity to resist, in refining tactics, as you already mentioned, and in attempting to the extent possible to make it hard for the Israelis to enter freely into these areas and to conduct offensive operation that disrupt, the expansion of the settlements in these areas. And to some degree, the resistance after 9 months also of an intensive counterinsurgency committed by the Israelis has been able to survive these attacks. And not only survive these attacks, but also the Israelis have not been able to really shock that resistance into a place where it's defeated or, raises the white flag. On the contrary, the resistance has been able to actually develop, evolve, and ensure that its defensive posture or offensive posture has become more deadly for the Israeli forces entering the area. So there's this one side of the equation that is important to note. It is geographically confined. It has its reasons historically, whether it's socioeconomic reality of areas like Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, where also the PA's, let's say, ideological hegemony is not it's most powerful in these areas. There's a reason why these areas became a hotbed of resistance, unlike other parts of the West Bank, whether it's Hebron or Bethlehem or Ramallah, for that matter. Having said so, there has been criticism launched from Gaza saying, where's the West Bank from the unfolding genocidal war? And of course, this is, a natural question to be raised by people in Gaza who are, asking, this is a national issue. Gaza shouldn't be fighting alone. And why are the West Bank still quiet? The reason for it, in a nutshell, is because the real organized force on the ground is the Palestinian Authority, backed by its social base and its clientist networks, that has ensured that it, first of all, did not take the decision to participate or open a third front in this war. The second front being Lebanon, the first front being Gaza. And not only that, it has cracked down on any attempt for Palestinians to organize, conduct protest. Even people meeting face to face would be reported on, and then the Israeli carceral system, this policy of mass confinement that also Nora mentioned, the arrest of more than 10,000 people, are the most active ingredients and participants, or possibly potentially people who would be the ones that would move the population of the West Bank towards a more confrontational, defiant posture. So that's been the reality. You have a crackdown, a double down from both the PA and Israel. And in the meanwhile, the past 2 decades, you didn't have the accumulation of power in these areas like Hebron or Ramallah or other areas. Now, this comes also within a larger context of people being in debt, a financial crisis, an economic crisis that is hurting Palestinians in the West Bank broadly. Palestinians have been deprived from Palestinian laborers in Israel have been deprived from their daily work. Palestinians in the bureaucracy of the PA, the employees of the PA, have not been paid their full due. So there's been also an economic crisis, and that economic crisis is reinforced by the images coming of Gaza. Palestinians in the West Bank are seeing what's happening in Gaza, and they're paralyzed. There's also a geography of fear, of paralyzing fear, as they see what's happening and unfolding in the Gaza Strip. And again, this is where the terms of the ideological fight is happening that I was mentioning earlier, between the PA trying to claim that the resistance is responsible for everything that is happening in Gaza, and between everybody else in Palestine who sees both the intention and the Israeli military machine as being the one responsible for the genocidal war. Nobody forced Israel to commit such unbearable destruction. Even after October 7, it had multiple options in terms of what it could have done. But, this is the ideological fight, and this is what the PA is doing now. It's telling people, look, this is what resistance gets you. And that's the way it can sustain at least its corrupt, treacherous system for as long as possible, through this kind of pragmatic use of Israeli violence against its own people.
And that presumably also keeps people docile against the Palestinian Authority, which is undoubtedly the main concern. And of course, if Hamas could be blamed for Israel's massacres, which of course it can't, I mean, that's just outrageous, then shouldn't we also blame the PA for the escalating Israeli attacks on Palestinians and the escalating land theft, which it is in fact directly complicit with, because the PA continues to work hand in glove with Israel. But that's my editorial commentary rather than a question.
Well, I would love to actually speak to that if you let me. I mean, I think we should go further. I think we should blame the PA for even the continuation of the war in Gaza, because as Israeli devises its policies, as it sees this corrupt leadership that we have in the West Bank, it's thinking to itself, the Palestinians could be defeated. We just need to apply more pressure. We need to find the right people in the right places. And we have this model in the West Bank. That's what is in the fantasy of every military and political leader in Israel, to replicate some sort of system, political system, a native authority that serves it, that cooperates with it and collaborates with it and makes the occupation inexpensive. Not an authority or a governance structure like the one that Gaza had, at least before October 7th, which binded or tried or attempted to bind resistance with a form of governance. So in fact, the ones responsible or most responsible within Palestine, I mean, again, at the end, Israel is the one responsible for the onslaught on the Palestinians since 100 years. But the one that is most responsible for the continuation war, for empowering Israel to think that it can defeat the Palestinian people, for empowering Israel to think that it can actually change the reality, that it can mold the Palestinian consciousness, that it can defeat and pacify the Palestinians, is this docile, ineffective, corrupt leadership that is running now the West Bank.
Well, last month, as we noted, and as Ali just alluded to, Israel quietly announced one of the largest state land grabs since the Oslo Accords were signed. Settler violence is at an all-time high and occurs with near total impunity from the Israeli military. Settlers and some Israeli ministers have publicly fantasized about the idea of resettling the Gaza Strip, selling off parts of Gaza for major real estate developers and turning it into a beachfront property grab. But their primary focus remains on the larger West Bank territory, which constitutes 1/5 of historic Palestine. What is the state of Israel's encroachment and land theft in the West Bank right now, as you see it? And how is this happening under the nose? I mean, it's not like they've ever faced any sort of retribution or responsibility or punishment for stealing Palestinian land, of course, over the last 100 years. But what is the state of these land grab policies right now?
I mean, look, this is a more since the rise of this kind of right-wing fascist current within Israeli society, embodied in people like Smotrich, Bezalel Smotrich, who's now the finance minister, and Itamar Ben-Gvir. They've been launching a war of position within the Israeli government, trying to actually control the bureaucracy that involves the management of the Palestinian population, land, resources in the West Bank. And they have been largely successful in positioning people who are sympathetic to their cause in these key positions within the West Bank, whether within the army level, whether it's within the bureaucracy, or even within the finance ministry, and all the bureaucratic legal work that you need to ensure a smooth expansion of illegal settlement buildup in the West Bank. And since October 7, this has just intensified in terms of Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir using their position within the government to embezzle out of the old Israeli bureaucracy more land, more finances for settlements, more resources. And we've seen this come across in terms of, first of all, this current defining its next frontier of settlements in areas B, which is the first time that Bezalel Smotrich claims that this is the area that they want to manage now. Which area B, for people who don't know, is in the Oslo agreements, the West Bank was divided to area A, B, and C. Area A is where the Palestinian Authority both controls civil and security issues. Area B is where Israel controls security issues, but the PA retains civil control and civil management of the population that exists in these areas. And Area C is where Israel controls both. And now also Bezalel Smotrich is defining the next frontier of settlements, the next frontier of ethnically cleansing the populations that actually exist in areas B or in Area B itself. So that's what's been unfolding in terms of this kind of inner war within the Israeli system itself. The repercussions are severe in terms of, the West Bank being choked by more settlements, by driving more settlers inwards into the West Bank, and creating the conditions, slowly but assuredly, for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. Having said that, I think what is also important to note for most people is that Bezalel Smotrich has been engaged in a financial war against the Palestinian system and against even the Palestinian Authority itself. And a lot of it is being read as, a form of collective punishment. This is just meant to punish Palestinians in the West Bank, to ensure that they understand that October 7 will also wreck their own lives and economic well-being. And there's these analyses and readings. However, it's actually more than that. the real threat is that, by destroying the financial system in the West Bank, you're creating the conditions for a transference of the population that does not need violence, but only needs an economic crisis to unfold, where, the middle classes and upper middle classes would leave Palestine, where you would have, increasing tension between social classes within the West Bank itself, increasing crime, increasing, the tensions internally, whether it would be directed at the occupation or not, would still be an issue that is not necessarily, taken inevitable, meaning that we shouldn't necessarily read that this kind of economic crisis could just induce an intifada. It could also mean it induces more of an internal strife, an internal civil war within the West Bank itself between Palestinians themselves, therefore creating the conditions for chaos. And that conditions of chaos could also propel a mass immigration movement from the West Bank to outside of the West Bank. So these are the tools that Bezalel Smotrich has been using. He did not go on his threat in every domain. In the economic part, he compromised to get more land grab and more settlements and more legitimation of settlements. But what the horizon is telling us about what's happening in the West Bank is that this right-wing fascist current is coming for a total domination of the West Bank, annexation of the West Bank, and depopulation of the West Bank.
Abdaljawad, you mentioned Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, who is, of course, one of the leaders in the West Bank settler movement, and is using his position as finance minister to create de facto Israeli integration of the West Bank into Israel. That's been an ongoing process, but he's been trying to accelerate it. And also, he is not a fan. I mean, we've been talking about the Palestinian Authority as a collaborator force for Israel, which it is, of course. It would seem to be a paradox then that Bezalel Smotrich is also seeking to undermine the Palestinian Authority by limiting its revenue, by confiscating money from it, and vastly extending Israel's claimed authority over land in the West Bank. Now, one way to possibly understand this apparent contradiction is the split that you alluded to in Israeli society. The Palestinian Authority is definitely seen as an ally by Israel, but not by all of Israel, but by its traditional so-called security establishment, the army, the Shin Bet, secret police, and so on. Whereas the West Bank settlers and people like Smotrich see the PA as an obstacle to their project of total annexation. Is that the way to understand this type of contradiction?
To some degree, yes, there is that kind of difference between, just recently, for instance, Yehuda Fox, I think his name, he was the commander of the Central Command of Israel, which includes the West Bank, resigned, and he claimed in his resignation that one of the issues that he couldn't resolve in his management of the West Bank is the issue of settler violence and settler encroachment, which he sees as problematic and could pave the ground for the next intifada to erupt in its full force and intensity. So there is this kind of vibrant, if you want, disagreement between, the old security network within Israel and these disturbers, these usurpers of the current status quo of, PA collaborating, getting economic flows from Europe and the United States, ensuring that the conflict can be managed without, these breaks in intense violence, giving Palestinians a semblance of life that is dependent, of course, and it's not dignified, or it's not a life that has any kind of dignity in it, but at least they can eat, drink, have some consumers tendencies, go to a mall somewhere. That's been the arrangement for the past couple of years, and at least since the second intifada, that has been the status quo. For these settlers, the PA is something to be destroyed. First of all, they see it as corrupting the Israeli soul, because the Israelis are now dependent on the Palestinians, even if their dependency is on a form of collaboration that maintains this kind of asymmetry of power. And eventually, these settlers, they don't want any Palestinians to be within what they claim is the land of Israel, between the river and the sea, or even, as we saw Birzeit Smotrich himself having, Jordan's map within his designs for, an expansive state of Israel that includes the East Bank, not only the West Bank. So in many ways, you're correct. They eventually see the PA as an enemy, even if it's collaborating with Israel and sustaining the settler enterprise, enabling the settler enterprise, empowering that settler enterprise. And because they're caught in that contradiction between launching this war against the Palestinian Authority and needing it at the same time, Birzeit Smotrich is playing, a game that does not completely instigate a crisis, but at the same time ensures, to the extent possible, that he can get as much concessions as possible in terms of legalization of what is considered in Israel's own law illegal outposts, and more land grab, defining the frontiers for next settlements, and ensuring that this right-wing fascist, nationalist, religious current controls all the key positions within the military and civil bureaucracy that controls the West Bank and its population. But what it tells us, Ali, I think, is that the next step, the horizon, is annihilation in the West Bank as well. It's only a matter of time, because they're the ones that are offering a solution. And this is where I would perhaps say that it's not that the Shabak and the military leaders that are, against that, but they see the status quo as something that is strategically viable for Israel for the meantime. But eventually, also, the Israeli security network, the old network, coming from the kibbutz and coming from the Israeli liberal left, they don't have a big problem with this form of depopulation and ethnic cleansing, because they practiced it in 1948, and they wouldn't really necessarily be against it in this current moment. They just don't want it to disrupt their strategic partnership with the Arab world. They don't want it to disrupt their strategic partnership with the United States and Europe. They have qualms about what that would mean in terms of isolating Israel more internationally. But eventually, I mean, in their also ideological upbringing, they're not necessarily ones that on ideological grounds against what the settlers are devising and planning to do.
So if you can see this coming, and you are a brilliant analyst, and others have said it too, it's very clear what Israel's goals are for the West Bank. What lessons should Palestinians be learning, and how can they prepare to defend themselves against this escalating violence? You noted that in the north of the West Bank, in particular, in Jenin, in and around Nablus, there are increasingly fierce and sophisticated armed resistance efforts that are confronting the enemy there with real challenges, using better and better tactics and weaponry. But that also requires social mobilization and a popular embrace of resistance. What other possibilities for Palestinians to strengthen their society in the face of this oncoming assault, particularly when they have, my word, traitors in their midst?
I mean, that's the key. That's, I think, the most important element, which is having traitors or having a Trojan horse in your midst that ensures that you're incapable of creating this social movement. In the past decade, I mean, I don't want to repeat myself, but in the past decade, every attempt at organizing social movement have been met with fierce violence. But what is very hopeful is that since at least 4 years, there is a politics of unbinding from the PA. There has been an increased delegitimizing of the PA. We've seen social forces rise to the occasion. attempting to organize in various localities within the West Bank. And we should remember that each, Hebron has its own tradition and history of resistance. It never practiced resistance on the scale of, the north of the West Bank, which was more about, occupying spaces. Hebron, for instance, is more keen on clandestine networks and small cells operating outside of the purview of, both Palestinian forces and Israeli forces. So there is that kind of also living memory that plays a role in defining the formation of resistance in the contemporary condition that we live in. Now we have an armed movement in the West Bank. Still in its early days, being met with fierce violence, and at the same time we had a highly organized attempt to clear out the West Bank from any active or vocal voices or social mobilizers. In the tradition in Palestine, we call those people dynamo, and dynamo comes from car mechanics. They're the ones that instigate and energize the population, form or organ, enable the conditions for the rise of social movements, whether middle class movements, whether armed movement, whether more radical movements. And Israel has a sophisticated surveillance system, and it has identified a lot of these people and has taken them out from the social purview. However, we should go back in history, Ali, and if we go back in history, the lessons that we as Palestinians should learn is that it's only places that had a fierce resistance are the ones that actually survived the Israeli Zionist onslaught. It's places where there was, and until this day, even with all the destruction and pain and suffering in Gaza and its immensity, uh, Gaza has a better chance of fending off the Israeli colonial machinery. Doesn't necessarily, mean that it will come victorious, but it has a better chance looking at, the conditions on the ground than the West Bank that has not accumulated power, that has not been, operating on the level of organizing a effective resistance, that has been absent from that for a lot of different reasons historically. But Gaza is the one that has actually the potential to not only survive but also garner strategic gains from the war that has started since October 7th. So the lessons of history tells us if you resist, you might have a chance. If you don't, then at the end, the colonizer does not respect those who collaborate with them or cooperate with them, and will get rid of them as soon as possible as well.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.